Welcome to a new F1 update from the Abu Dhabi paddock. After a rather exciting qualifying session, qualifying in which Max Verstappen basically did what he had to do, taking pole position and above all putting the pressure on McLaren. A pole position that not everyone within Red Bull expected, especially after yesterday. Helmut Marko said on Friday, we are not in the most comfortable position, but as quite often Red Bull changed the setup and got it right just in time, just before Parc Fermé going into qualifying. Those setup changes were mainly targeted to get rid of the understeer, and Marko said that improved our performance in Sector 3, because that was the weakness in Friday practice. Still, McLaren is mighty strong in Sector 3, but at least Red Bull is not losing out that much anymore. So they got rid of some of the understeer, suits Max's driving style better, and Marko said, I also think that's beneficial for the race. So they're not only confident for qualifying, that works for qualifying, but also for Sunday's race. The second aspect is, of course, Max Verstappen delivering under pressure. And that's what he mentioned in the press conference. He said, well, it's actually a bit that I enjoy when the pressure is fully on me, and to deliver in that exact moment. He says, well, it's something I think I'm pretty good in, and also something I enjoy. And I think Max Verstappen exactly proved both elements today. I have to say also Lando Norris to some extent did what he had to do, especially after Q1 looked a little bit nervous. The first run was maybe a little bit on the cautious side, and with the field being so close at the end of 2025, of course, that leads to an even more cautious run in at the end of Q1, because you cannot afford any mistake. So Lando maybe a little bit too cautious, maybe a little bit nervous, but he found his feet throughout qualifying and put his car on the front row. That's quite important around here. I mean, all 5 last races have all been won from pole position. And given that the run to turn 1 is a relatively short one, being on the front row can be quite an important step for Lando Norris. He himself said, okay, I wanted to be on pole, but this is still a decent position to be in for tomorrow. Andrea Stella even called it a good position for tomorrow. Red Bull tried to, still play the mind games with Helmut Marko, saying, well, every time Lando is next to Max Verstappen on the starting grid, he gets a bit nervous. Of course, that's part of putting even more pressure on Lando's shoulders and, playing those mind games that I have been playing already for a couple of weeks by now. Andrea Stella, the McLaren team boss, tried to calm everything down, and he said, well, Lando has to focus on his own start, so the initial getaway, and then he would recommend Lando to be a bit prudent, so to be a bit cautious. Stella explained the inside here going into turn 1 is not great. We've seen some incidents in the past, especially last year with Max and Oscar Piastri. So Stella said he has to be cautious, and maybe even if he has a good getaway, not take crazy risks to get into the lead, but maybe just slot in P2, even P3 behind Oscar would still be acceptable, even though that might make it a bit more complicated in terms of papaya rules and all the stuff with team orders we've been talking about for days now. Oscar said about it, I expect to have some more conversations, some more chats on Sunday morning before going into the race to clarify everything before we get onto the starting grid. But Stella said the main thing is Lando has to play it safe and not do anything stupid in turn 1. P2 would be fine. But Lando plays a little bit with that thought, because he said, well, everyone on the grid thinks that I cannot take any risk, that I cannot afford to take any risk. But Lando said maybe I can even use that to my advantage if that's necessary. Assuming that Lando has a relatively okay start and can slot in into P2, then the big question for Sunday's race is, what will Max Verstappen do? Because if Lando finishes second or third, of course, that's not going to be enough for Max and Red Bull. So will he use the Lewis Hamilton 2016 Abu Dhabi tactics by slowing down, bunching the whole field up? Today, he basically repeated what he said in his Dutch media session on Thursday, saying, well, the best bit is on Thursday, he didn't answer for 2 seconds, which led to everyone in the room laughing, because basically everyone took it as a yes that he might actually do it. But after that, Max said, well, the layout has changed. It's a bit more difficult now to bunch the field up. Slipstream effect is bigger than it was like 9 years ago. They removed some of the slow corners, so it all got a little bit more complicated. Even the Pirelli tires are more robust, so less overheating. But still, that's not a no. And everyone in this paddock, knowing Max Verstappen, his mentality, his winner's mindset, expects him to at least try everything he possibly can if things are not really going his way. And if Lando is behind him in the mirrors and not at P4 where Max needs him to be. So we can expect everything, and that's what Lando said in the press conference, that he is ready for everything. Andrea Stella tried to nuance it a little bit in his post-qualifying media session, because he said, I still expect Max to play it fair, to keep it clean, and he said to act within the sporting boundaries. Of course, you can discuss and argue what those sporting boundaries are, because maybe what Lewis did in 2016 is perfectly within those sporting boundaries. So I think everyone in the paddock expects Max to at least try whatever he can, and I guess he also has the right to do so. One thing that's probably positive for McLaren is that heading into the weekend, they feared graining a little bit, front graining. It's something that McLaren has been struggling with a little bit more than some other teams, especially Red Bull. And this is a track, of course, particularly difficult for the rears, but the fronts might start to grain. And that was a topic on Friday. But we just had a chat with Pirelli's Mario Isola. And he said, well, based on all the data we have, we don't think graining will be a massive headache. So also probably not be a massive headache for McLaren, because Pirelli expects a relatively easy, straightforward one-stop race. Medium hard, that will be their recommendation. And they said, okay, if graining would be a huge factor, and they don't think it will be, but then that would lead to a two-stop. But again, they think it should be all right. Two-stop can only come into play if Max Verstappen really bunches the field up, and then someone who has nothing to lose can make a cheap pit stop and try something on fresh tires to close the gap, which will go relatively easy if the leader is bunching the pack up, and then maybe try to overtake on fresh boots. And maybe you need something like that, because overtaking and following around here is difficult. Following is even more difficult in 2025, so that might be something to keep an eye on tomorrow during the race. If Max Verstappen will bunch the field up, of course, it will bring some others into play. And George Russell already was referring to that a little bit during qualifying, because in Q3, he said on the radio, well, maybe we can get a tow from Red Bull. And after that, when we talked to him in the media pen, he clarified what he meant. He said it was basically a hint, not for Mercedes, but a hint for Red Bull, because Red Bull went early in Q3 in the first run with Max, and he basically tried to encourage Red Bull to do the same towards the end of qualifying, because if they did, then after Max's flying lap, he could probably give George Russell a tow. So that's how George tried to take benefit from the situation Red Bull and Max Verstappen are in. Didn't happen in the end, but still can be affected tomorrow. And Fernando Alonso already said when he got asked about it, I don't want to be in Monday's news, so he wants to play it clean. He said our battle is with Haas and with Sauber and with teams in the midfield. So I prefer not to get involved in the title fight. He does want to watch the title fight because he laughed this track is relatively easy, maybe even relatively boring for drivers. So we have plenty of time to look at the big screens, and that's what not only Fernando, but I think a lot of drivers will try to do tomorrow. Finally, to round up everything related to qualifying, we have to talk about Ferrari. Another difficult, another disappointing day for the Scuderia. Lewis Hamilton knocked out again in Q1, the third time in a row. Of course, that related a little bit to his crash in FP3. I was trackside under the hotel, what's basically in the media center now called the Latifi corner. But I was trackside, and all of a sudden his Ferrari passed behind us on the track, on the trailer, on the truck. So that was a bit, basically summed up Lewis's season and Ferrari's season so far. Lewis said, of course, that was not ideal going into qualifying. Actually, in qualifying, the car felt relatively good to him, but the margins are so small that it was still not enough. Charles Leclerc, again, got maximum out of the Ferrari car, but when he got asked in the pen, are you surprised to see Lewis struggling this much in qualifying? Charles said, no, because I'm driving the very same car and I know how incredibly tricky the car is to drive. It got even trickier towards the end of the season, and that's not necessarily related to the Ferrari car itself, but more to the others putting upgrades on the car. Ferrari is struggling for competitiveness, and as a result of that, they have to try more extreme setups and go more extreme with the car in general, and that has made it even more complicated than what it was earlier. And that's why Charles said on the radio that he even wanted to abort his qualifying lap 5 times. In the end, the lap got him through to the next qualifying section, but when he clarified it with us, he said, well, I really thought I would put it in the wall. And I had that thought like more than once. So basically with the current Ferrari car, it's either go getting knocked out of Q1 or risk everything with risking to put it in the wall. And that's what Charles said. I feel like I was rally driving. I guess he's relatively happy that qualifying sessions are all done now for 2025. But he doesn't even want to get his hopes up anymore, probably after all the years with Ferrari, because when he got that question, he said, well, I'm a bit scared to say that because I don't know what 2026 will bring. Still, Ferrari hopes it will be better because they put all efforts on 2026. So it's a matter of surviving tomorrow and then hopefully come up with a better car next year. Before we have all focus on the new regulations, of course, we have a massive title decider coming up under the floodlights here in Abu Dhabi. Maybe even crowning a new world champion. But no matter what happens after the race, we'll of course be back with a new F1 update from the Abu Dhabi paddock. So for now, thanks a lot for watching and hope to see you again tomorrow.